Hello everyone and welcome back to the GeekWave. It's the low budget show. It's the show so low it has no budget. Man, we had an interesting episode last week where we talked about the Oscars coverage and how insane it was. Because it was insane. Regardless of what you think about the award show or anything, they're never going to do it again. Because it was insane and crazy. But because of that, we had a couple news pieces that kind of got pushed back, so I didn't talk about them. We're going to be talking about those this week, so some of this news, it's outdated, but it's worth mentioning and talking about a little bit, I think, so we'll get into it. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about Morbius, because fuck if I know. I'm not doing a review for Morbius, I just want to talk about, how films should work. And then we will jump into our main topic for the week, which I will get into after the news, but it's going to be Indiana Jones related, and it's kind of a fun one. I've been cooking it around for a while, and I'm just excited to get into it. So for starters, we will jump into the news, and our first piece of news, again, most of this stuff is pretty old news, so you probably heard everyone talk their piece about it, but I still want to talk about it. First off, Christina Ricci is going to be returning to the Addams Family universe in an unspecified role for the Wednesday Addams show. This is news made specifically for me. I love Christina Ricci. If anybody has seen me on this channel before talking about any of her works, you know she's one of the few people in Hollywood I genuinely love and have a huge crush on, and that stems from Wednesday Addams, because when I watched those when I was a young lad, I tell you, straight up my alley. When you look at who I am as a person, you can pinpoint the type of women that I've been interested in and I have courted, and a lot of that might be related to the Addams Family and Morticia and Wednesday. I adore Wednesday Addams and her role that was so great in there. So just having her come back to the world, I think that's really cool because it just shows that she's interested in trying to be a part of that world still. And she still obviously has some reverence for it, which is very cool to see, because sometimes you get an actress like this that looks back at their old work and they're like, oh yeah, whatever, I don't care. But that's fun. That makes me really happy, just because it's just great to see that. It's such a good show and it's such a great franchise, and I love the Addams Family in every interpretation. I think there's something great in every interpretation. Some of the animated stuff isn't great, but Christina Ricci, I can come back to talk about this. That's really fun. That makes me happy. So I will definitely be doing more Addams Family coverage on this channel at some point. I don't know when, whatever form it's going to take. You wait. When we get closer to Wednesday, I'll be talking a lot about it because it's fun. It's cool, and it's doing some interesting stuff. I just enjoy that. I enjoy when we can take these silly concepts, because the Addams Family, I'm not saying they're outdated, because they're not outdated. They're clearly not. But it's such a concept of a pre-millennial time where it's look how quirky this family is, where they think they're the ones who are understanding of everything. And then just the world thinks they're weird because of it. That is such a concept that today doesn't work because everybody's so different. But I think the fact that you can pinpoint putting them in a normal town, making them the dark weirdos, it could work fun. And that's great. And just having her join this amazing cast already, super pumped for this. It's one of the few shows on Netflix I'm actually excited to see. So, Wednesday Addams, that's going to be a fun show. And Christina Ricci is a fantastic actress. If you haven't watched Yellow Jackets, watch Yellow Jackets. And now we move over to something that still impresses me. And I want to bring this up again. We kind of talked about it, I think, a couple months back with Grant Gustin. But this is the CW has renewed almost every one of their shows for slate. So the ones they have, and I think, are Legends and Batwoman, but everything else is still getting moved up. Still going forward, baby. Oh boy. Look, Superman and Lois, I get it. Did they renew Kung Fu? Was that canceled? I can't remember. Walker, yeah, I get it. That obviously is going to be going. Riverdale's doing whatever the fuck Riverdale does, so I'm not surprised that that's still going. What does surprise me is The Flash is still going, because I feel so bad for Grant Gustin all the time. Because clearly the guy, he looks tired of it. And I completely understand. When you've been doing this for almost a full decade, at this scale, in this company, where they work you like a horse until you pass out, I understand why that sucks. And I know he's doing a smaller episode count for season 9. That's still a lot. And that's an insane amount to do. So I'm glad he's getting his pay raise. And this just reminds me, we are fortunate that some people like Bitsy and Tyler have such good experiences on Superman and Lois, because the rest of these people, it sounds like they worked really hard for very little payoff. Like, wasn't it just Cole Sprouse recently who said, I think we're all ready to move on from Riverdale. Like, we've done enough. We don't need to keep doing this, but we're all still here with superpowers and a multiverse. We're really done. That sucks. I feel bad for them in that regard. Riverdale, not a show I love, but I mean, nobody should have to do that if they don't want to. Like, you're going to be 30 years old. Do you want to still be doing Riverdale? Is that your show? I've done an episode of the GeekWave earlier, like what could be the next Riverdale. So when you cancel Riverdale because every actor wants to quit and storm out, maybe look at the list I made and pick something from there to do next. Like Scooby-Doo. Warner Brothers own Scooby-Doo. Just saying. So it could be something to think about. Moving on from there, we do have a little bit of news regarding a Nova property. So one of the Moon Knight scribes will be working on a Nova property in some regards for the MCU. I don't got many opinions on this one. I like Dick Ryder. I love Richard Ryder. I think he's a cool character. He represents a really good place in the Marvel cosmology as probably, I don't want to say like their Green Lantern, but he's definitely like the notable hero of the cosmos, where he's not like a rebel or a renegade or a guardian of the galaxy. He's just a generally good guy. Some people are saying it's going to be Sam Alexander. I don't think they'll do Sam Alexander. What could make them go that route is depending on how the Blue Beetle movie does. Because I guess we could talk about that a little bit too. They cast Sharon Stone as Ted Kord's ex-wife, who's the villain of the piece. That's an interesting choice. I don't know if I would have went that route, but okay. Curious. I hope we see Ted Kord in the movie. Look, I love Jaime. I do like Jaime. He's a fun character. He's a cool concept. But I am of the era that Ted Kord just represents something about comics I like. I've said it before. If I ever wanted to like step into acting, which I fucking don't. It sounds terrible. And I got to be a big superhero for DC, I would want to be Ted Kord. Just because he's so silly, neurotic, and fun, and just kind of like impulsively prepared. He's not like Batman where it's like OCD, everything's controlling, I have to have it my way. He's more like, yeah, I prepared for this situation in the eventuality that it would happen, but I never thought it would, so the technology's outdated, I don't know what's going on. That to me is so fun. But yeah, cool. Sharon Stone in a Blue Beetle movie, yeah, I'll support that. That's kind of cool. Dick Ryder getting a movie, yeah, I'll see a Dick Ryder any day of the week. I love that guy. Super fun. Anytime we can get more Nova merchandise, he is your Superman. I know people are like, oh, it's the Sentry, it's Hyperion, it's Gladiator, it's Captain Britain, blah, blah, blah. Your Superman is Dick Ryder, okay? Your Superman is Richard. He is, because he represents the best of people. He will make the sacrifice play. He is the good guy. He is the nobleman. He is the one that represents that place in the Marvel universe. He is the ultimate good man. Dick Ryder is a good man. Sorry. I'm not sorry. I'll make that joke forever. So we got some Bill Skarsgård news. Okay, so Bill Skarsgård, everyone's favorite Skarsgård, unless you know any of the other ones. We could probably do a ranking of the Skarsgårds at some point. There's probably one that sucks the most, but I couldn't tell you who it is. Who's probably got the worst career? It's the one nobody knows. But first, HBO Max will be developing a television series with Andy Muschietti also as executive producer, based on the classic series of books. That super long book that everyone says they've read and enjoyed, but it's actually a piece of shit. Well, it's going to be getting a prequel series called Welcome to Derry, set in the 60s, about the origins of Pennywise and the town Derry, and who gives a flying fuck about this. This is such a dumb idea to me, mainly because you really are just taking the piss out of Pennywise, aren't you? Like, I didn't enjoy those most recent films. I think the first one is incredibly well done. It's a beautiful film. It's technologically marvelous. It's just a fun horror film that does something creative. Chapter 2 was such a bore, such a waste of time. I will never get over the fact they defeated him by just like bullying him. That is a terrible message to send, even if it's like the plot of the story. What a terrible message to send to people that you can belittle them just by shouting names and calling them stuff. That is such a stupid message to share. So I did not like that movie. But actually going back in time to talk about like the first 27 years before Pennywise showed up to wreck Derry, what a weird choice. Not a good one. Just a weird one that I guess could be filled out enough where people find it interesting. But is it? Is it really interesting to try that? Do we need the origin of the villain? Is this like the Jokerization of these characters where we have to, once again, give our sympathy to the evil clown that killed children? Do we have to do that? Is that something we need to do? Is this just us trying to like spin off another franchise with the Pennywise legacy? I don't care. I think it's pointless. And on top of that, if, this one of these Skarsgårds, I think it's Bill that's still attached to this one. Who's to say? They're all the same eventually. Another Skarsgård, Alexander or Bill. I think it's Bill. They're getting a shot at the Crow. Everybody, once in their life, if you are in Hollywood and you are a man of a certain energy, and that energy is Brandon Lee energy, you are eventually attached to star in the remake of The Crow. But like every other Crow sequel, it doesn't matter. It falls apart and you will actually never get to play the Crow. This definitely exists in a world where every superhero property is used as something else than it's supposed to be. So the fact that a studio owns The Crow, they're like, we can turn this into a franchise. We'll get a nice actor on it. Look, at some point, Jason Momoa was attached to this. At some point, everybody has been attached to The Crow. It's not going to get made. I will eat like a pair of shorts live on television if they actually make a movie about The Crow again, because there's no way they will. It never worked. Even in the original Crow, it didn't work. It's insane. But whatever, we'll see what happens. Like, this stuff it blows my mind that people can actually think this will work. Or people can think this is where we're going to go, and this is how things are going to be made. It is so unlikely, so bizarre, and not something that works out the way it should. But hey, sequel to The Crow, prequel to the It stuff, it's a great time to like things that are based on existing properties. And that leads us to a little bit of Morbius talk, because I'm so fascinated by this film because it's terrible. It's such a bad film. It's just so stupid. And I just love that the director is just taking the blame away. He didn't do anything wrong. He's like, Sony went above my head and did all this stuff. They made these terrible post-credit scenes. I didn't tell Kevin Feige. So I want to just throw this question out there. Do people want to see Andrew Garfield come back now? I don't, because it's going to end up like this monstrosity, and he's going to hate himself again and again because of it. So don't do it. Don't do it. Morbius is bad. Thus concludes the Morbius talk for this episode. What a terrible film. What a terrible franchise. What a terrible way to create anything. What a waste of potential and time. We do not need to make any more of these. We do not even have to try to make any more of these. We should just stop and move on with our lives and make a sexy Craven film, because everyone in the Craven cast is sexy. Everyone in the Madam Web cast is sexy. Let's just forget about sex pest Jared Leto and start fresh with some cool, sexy people doing stuff in a jungle. Let's come back from that break and let's talk about a different type of jungle, the jungle of the Lost Ark. Every so often I do try to find a topic that just doesn't really have a merit to why it exists. Sometimes I do things based on a movie nearby. Sometimes I just talk about nothing. Talking about Indiana Jones right now is a weird time to kind of start talking about Indiana Jones, because it's right there before the video game is coming out and before we're getting the new movie. So it's like, why would I do it now? I don't know. I don't know. I just felt I needed to talk about it because I am very curious about the idea of this franchise's existence. There's just something about Indiana Jones that toys the line between being of the era it was created and being a modern piece of franchise material. Because it's right there, like the actual idea, like Raiders and Temple of Doom and all of those movies, they're right there in that era of like Back to the Future, of Jaws, of, I guess you could say, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, of those shows and those movies that just don't get rebooted or remade. But then it did get rebooted or remade or a sequel in 2012 with the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. So it kind of like fledged out of there, which is interesting to me because like on paper, that franchise works best when it was in that time period when we didn't have a lot of technology. And yes, the movies take place in the past. I get that. But it's just feels so much better when it's like a classic film as opposed to a modern jaunt, you know? Like, it's just, so much more interesting when you look at it as like, oh, it's the 40th anniversary of this film. It's the 50th anniversary of this film. There's something just so much better about that feeling as opposed to making it like this big piece, this big sweeping epic of something. So when we're getting an Indiana Jones 5 in 2023, supposedly, we'll see if that actually comes to fruition. That is just such an interesting choice to me because it doesn't feel like it should happen. And it shouldn't. Let's just say right now, it's weird that this movie's being made. It's weird that they got a good cast and writers behind it. It's weird that James Mangold's directing it. Phoebe Waller-Bridge is attached to, being the star in it. And Harrison Ford is willing to come back to it. Like, that all just makes me go, what? This isn't something that we should be doing anymore. But I guess it is kind of pushed itself away from that Back to the Future Jaws feeling and has become like a Jurassic Park. It has become like a Star Wars, where these actors are going to come back and do these things forever because we won't let people escape being the one role. I've kind of talked about this too when I talked about the Prequel idea, where we do a sequel in the future when we're kind of rebooting things. This isn't that though, isn't it? This is just like the literal timeline of these characters are moving up, but Harrison Ford will still be the same character. We're not changing anything that happened to him. He still got all of his facial tics and his character beats in one montage on a train at some point in The Last Crusade. Everything that happens with that character still happened. I'm just thinking, do audiences want this? Because there's something to be said about them wanting it and something to be said about them not wanting it. Kingdom of the Crystal Skull really burned that bridge, I think, for a lot of people, where the want to actually see, like, oh, Harrison Ford come back, it's always going to be there. Even when Indy steps on screen in Kingdom, it's still iconic, it's still memorable, you still like him as that character and like his attitude. And then you just start to realize, oh, this guy is like 76. Do we need him tracing around the jungle or a desert doing all this stuff? Do we want to see that? Is it working? Has it worked in the past? Like, it really, I guess you could even say this, like, you haven't seen it to this level or this extreme. Because even when Harrison came back as Han Solo, he wasn't the main focus. He wasn't the title character. He was playing this guy who was more reserved and like, I don't want to be a part of this. Same with Mark Hamill and the Star Wars stuff. When these people come back, they are not the prominent figure that they used to be. And that's kind of like the key to making the aged figure work. But when you're calling the film Indiana Jones 5, and of course, that's probably not the official title. This is his story. And I'm not saying we can have these elder statesmen of these films come back and do something. We can, of course we can. But this is billed as the action beat. And do we want to see that? Do we want to see Harrison Ford run around doing that anymore? I've said this a bunch, and I will stand by this testament. I don't want to see it. I don't need to see that. I don't think there's a need for us to see him doing this stuff. And I think there are ways around that. And I don't know. Is a prequel the right idea when it comes to Indiana Jones? The problem with that lies in the character itself, where it is his most iconic performance. It could be Han Solo for some people, but to Harrison Ford, his favorite performance that is his most iconic is Indiana Jones. And that's cool. There's something to be said about that because it is important, it is powerful to see him in that role, to see him want to be in that role. And we probably just, it's the thing that happened when we did Solo. And I'm going to compare these a lot because it's just Harrison Ford at his worst and Harrison Ford at his best in terms of what he wants to do. When we had the Solo film, we recast Han Solo. It wasn't a big deal to people because it's a prequel film. Harrison Ford clearly doesn't want to be involved in this. And you got an actor who was willing to be his own interpretation of the character. I think Alden Ehrenreich should have taken that place of the action star, and I'm so upset that he didn't get to do that because he deserves to be the next big thing in this stuff. He's a talented actor who deserves that break. So we semi-accepted the idea of a Han Solo being replaced with a younger actor with vague similarities to a Harrison Ford type. Could that work with Indiana Jones? Probably to a different extreme. I just don't know if the audiences would react to that in a positive way. And because they really didn't when it came to Solo either. Like, I think Alden did fantastic. That's one of my favorite films of the Star Wars universe. I love Solo. I love what that world built. I don't know if the general audiences would accept what that Harrison Ford-less Indiana Jones film would look like. So the question that kind of came up to me is, we have 5 films now. We're going to be having 5 films with Harrison Ford playing this character for pretty much his entire career. The 80s to the 2020s, Harrison Ford will be connected to the Indiana Jones character. We live in a world with endless reboots and requels and trying these different steps to make these things work. How do you realistically make an Indiana Jones reboot work? Can it work? Should it work? Do we want to see that? Is it a smart choice to do that? I'm on two minds right here. First off, I'm always under the impression these characters are more than just the actor and more than just the team that makes them. You should be able to try any interpretation of any character you want to make it work. Movies have, especially since the 80s onwards, Star Wars onwards, movies have become the modern mythology. Superheroes are kind of taking that prominence right now. But before that, you had Arnold and Stallone and Ford and Willis doing these prominent performances, making these iconic characters that became iconography, and you knew them from this certainty that you'd like them and you respect them and you want to see them do anything. You should be able to take those basic characters and change them to whatever you want. Okay, we've had countless Terminator ideas being presented. We've had Rambo become whatever Rambo needs to be. I don't think Indiana Jones is any different than that. I just think as a icon, that is harder to do than Terminator, than Rocky, than any of those things. I would say you could do something like Creed when it comes to Indiana Jones, where maybe the next generation steps in. And part of me thinks that's what this movie's going to be, because Phoebe Waller-Bridge is playing the granddaughter or daughter to Marcus, who's a character we saw in the original film. I could see that being a case where it's like, hey, you can step up to take this thing, and then maybe we'll spin that off into having Phoebe do her own movie. It's just a very interesting idea that's being presented with those. And I don't know if the audiences could like that, because let's be real. I know movies are aimed for a younger demographic, especially the original Indiana Joneses. They were mature, they were for anybody. Today's audience is definitely geared towards the younger generation, but the younger generation does not have the reverence or respect for Indiana Jones. That's just the case of everything. They do not have that, they just don't enjoy it the way another generation did. And I've talked about this numerous times too. My generation is right on the cusp of like the last generation that grew up with VHS and landline phones. We had all these different things. Literally to this day on my bedside, I have a VHS copy of the original Ninja Turtles movie. I own that. I have the VHS copies of all of the Raiders and Temple and Crusade movies. I have those. I know that generation. I know those films well. The generation younger than me, let's say 20 years and younger, because I'm 24, let's say 20 years and younger, that generation, do they care? Would they care about like 78-year-old Harrison Ford running around dealing with Marion and talking to Ilsa and all these characters? Would they care about that the way we do? And that's the problem that the requel or the reboot or any of this happens. It's like you are picking the wrong things that your audience doesn't care about. That's a thing I think is going to hinder this from actually becoming experimental or trying something new. It's always going to be intrinsically connected to the idea of what this movie needs to be. It has to look a certain way. It has to feel a certain way. We'll never be able to grow out of that because that's what the original generation wanted. And they're going to be the vocal ones that actively go to see this. And you know what? Maybe if you just rebooted it, let's say, hypothetically, let's say we get a young actor who's prominent and coming up. I'm not going to say Chris Pratt or Bradley Cooper or any of those generic white guys. Let's say Henry Golding, because Snake Eyes failed. They cast him as Dr. Indiana Jones, okay? He's our new Indiana Jones. He is coming into his own in this world. We're doing all the retreads again. Does making the similar movie to Raiders today feel too much like a Jungle Cruise, too much like a Lost City, too much like an Uncharted? Does it lose the thing that made it special in the first place, and could it work? That is such a complex thing, and that's something that's also been messing me up a little bit. Raiders of the Lost Ark, the best of all of the movies, worked because it was so simple. It didn't overextend itself like gratuitous violence or action. It was a man who does some archaeology on the side while he's a professor, running around the jungles and deserts trying to find this, like ark that housed the, 10 Commandments. Like, there is something just so simple about that. And the fighting was simple. The choreography was simple. It's a beautifully made film because it's simple and it wasn't trying too hard. It was practical sets, practical effects. Everything looked beautiful. Even the things that were a little cheesy, they looked good. If we were to make this today, I wholeheartedly believe this, it would look as bland and cheesy as Uncharted did. It would look as bad as Death of the Nile did. You lose so much when you take away the era that it comes from. And even if we go back in time, it's still going to have that prestigious polish of a film from 2023. And I don't know if that's going to work well. I will say the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull did work to the benefit that we were on the cusp of using these things in the modern stream of stuff, so it didn't look as like polished and ugly as things look today. That to me is the biggest problem. So if we just say we just reboot Raiders of the Lost Ark, we're doing the same thing. We got a Henry Golden type. He's in there. He's going to be our lead. That movie, on paper, even just looking at a trailer, just looking at that, it's going to look like a 30 Rock skit compared to what the original Raiders was. Because that is just so beautifully dirty. And we don't make dirty movies anymore. And I don't mean dirty as like, pornographic. I mean dirty like we don't make these guys look rough and rigged and like Harrison Ford's getting punched in the face every second. He's just like, I'm too tired for this shit. I'm just going to shoot the guy. We don't do those anymore. So when the iconography of that film just becomes another, brick in the wall that is these action adventure films with a star that's as our lead, it loses what makes it special and it doesn't become something satisfying. It just becomes basic and bland and has no real merit to it. And that to me is exactly why you shouldn't reboot the Indiana Jones character, because it's not going to be iconic then. Look, I know we got years to see how some of these films are going to do, but can you honestly tell me things like the recent Death on the Nile, Uncharted, Lost City, Jungle Cruise, Jumanji films, do any of those strike you as they're going to be something you go back to watch and revere and think about over and over and over again? No, they are franchise pieces. They are trying to build a larger universe as opposed to being a creative idea. When you made Raiders of the Lost Ark, it wasn't about what's the next adventure going to be. How do we set this up for a bigger stakes? It's like we're just following a cool guy. We're doing a movie that's an homage to these pulpy serials that we grew up on. We all love these original films. Everybody involved in Raiders loved those original pulpy serials. That's what we're doing. And when we make movies today, we lose that feeling. And I think we almost had it. We almost had that idea presented well in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I don't love that film. I am softer on it than most people just because I think it's the first one I saw in theaters. I've seen all of the subsequent ones in theaters since then. It is cool. I don't think it's a bad film. It's just doing all the right beats the wrong way. And that's the part that upsets me and doesn't get it to work properly. So when we come back to a fifth one, this is going to be the telltale sign if this is actually going to be a franchise. And if this is the last one, this could be the Logan of the Indiana Jones universe where it's his swan song to wrap everything up. But who's to say? So I gave you a couple options here. Should we reboot it? Maybe. It could work. A younger generation could give this a lot of money because those other films I mentioned, they're doing okay box office-wise. Also, the people that love the original film, they're not going to be the ones that are going to enjoy a reboot. But I'm going to firmly say here, if you get the right talent, and I genuinely believe that James Mangold is the right talent, you could reboot this with a new lead with the same characters. And would it be formulaic? A little bit. But when you tell me you have an interesting story to develop and you let your character not quip every second, use practical effects, full-on locations, you can do something original. Now, I was sitting here, and this is something I've been thinking about for a while. Who is the modern equivalent of the Harrison Ford type? You need somebody who's a little bit grouchy, doesn't want to be there all the time, is a little upsetting, isn't really enjoying himself, but he's still likable, and you still love him, you still want to see him. Alden Ehrenreich's a great example. He can play the kind of cocky version of that in a really charming way. I do like that. I know it's been said a lot. Donald Glover has that energy. I think you put Donald Glover in The Jungle, you have the charismatic nature there. Those two were both in Solo. I could see that. I will throw out a name that might not be one people think about. Okay, I got two actually. I can't remember their specific names. What is the name of the guy that played Riff in the recent West Side Story? He's got that really fun, flavorful energy that could be something cool to see. I could see Misa Masoud from Aladdin. He's kind of got that energy. That could be the right thing to look for. But the one I was just thinking of, he's not my first choice, but I could definitely see this being something. If we're going to skew to like the younger side, I could definitely see the Nate Jacobs guy. Elgardi, something like that. Jacob Elgardi from Euphoria. I mean, if you want to get like right down to it and just find a really tall, freaky dude to be your Indiana Jones, Nate Jacobs is not a bad choice. He's got the right build, energy, and suave to be a guy that people love and they kind of think like, this guy's handsome, arrogant enough to be Harrison Ford. I think that works. If you were to skew maybe a little generation older, Timothy Olyphant would be a great choice. Pedro Pascal, Oscar Isaac, those guys are great. They got their own things going on now, so I wouldn't choose them. If I had to pick, and honestly, this is really hard to do, but if I had to pick somebody to become the next Indiana Jones, Misa Massoud is one of my top choices. Jacob Lagarde is one of my top choices. And Henry Golding. I know Henry Golding is attached to whatever the hell's going to happen with what the fuck was he in Snake Eyes. We'll see what happens with that. But I really like both of those guys, and I think they could do something special. Again, I don't think we would ever reboot Indiana Jones just because he's too iconic. It's like Rocky. We can't have somebody else be Rocky. We can give you a Creed. We can put Phoebe Waller-Bridge in this next movie as the daughter or granddaughter of a character you know, but we can't actually reboot it that way. So let's change the subject a little bit to this. If we were to change everything we know about Raiders and the Indiana Jones franchise, what is a kind of character we'd like to see do their own adventure? I'm going to throw this out there. It has been said numerous times. I'm going to just throw it out there again. Currently, the actor that played Short Round is apparently returning to acting with Everything Everywhere All at Once. I have not seen that film yet. I cannot wait to see it. He is back. He is the husband role. He's an older man now. Of course, he was a child in the 80s, so he's now a more matured guy, but he's still younger than Harrison Ford is today. Could we see the adventures of Short Round in the jungle? Could that be maybe he's leading his own archaeological dig? Maybe he is out there adventuring, running scams, doing something like that for people. Maybe he has grown up to try to like fill in the footsteps of becoming an Indiana Jones. And the world around him is like, you're never going to be Indy. And he's like, I'm not trying to be. Maybe there's some psychological damaging to being like the child sidekick to a man like that breaks your heart and leaves you in a place that's kind of scary. Because if we filmed it today, okay, let's see. In the 2012 movie, it was set during like the Cold War, right? So that would respectively lead us to like the space race era, kind of like the 60s to 70s now in the modern day. You could see him fighting for certain rights for people. That could be an interesting area to explore with Short Round. Or you do the adventures of young Short Round, where you get him narrating the story and you can do a younger version of that. I think you have a character there that has potential to come back that hasn't, that you can do something special with. Get Shia LaBeouf back to play his character. You tried to spin it off anyways to make him the young buck. It didn't work. Maybe now he's humbled himself out enough where that could actually become something special and there wouldn't be any pressure to make that unique or crazy. My favorite character in the entirety of the franchise is Marion. I love Marion. She's a cool character. Karen Allen's a really fun actress. I'm not saying to have her come back and play the character. What I'm saying you could do is recast a young Marion and we could see her adventures, because that could be something really fun to play with. You know, you get like your Felicity Jones type. I don't know why I'm just digging into the Star Wars well so much, but if you get a character like that, go back to that era, that time period where people liked it, where there was the most prominent, you could do something special there and have things work out in a really cool manner, in a really cool way. I just think that is how you would do it. You can't really just say, all right, here you go. We're slapping the label on Bradley Cooper. He's your Indiana Jones. We're putting him in the jungle. People can't do that. It's an SNL skit. It's a joke. Nobody would take it seriously. But if you said, we're taking the concept of Indiana Jones and showing you a troubled guy like Shia LaBeouf or the actor that played Short Round coming in, dealing with the ramifications of who Indy is to them in their respective world, that could give you something very special to play with. That could give you an idea of what these characters have to be, how they have to behave, that you wouldn't necessarily expect from somebody in that field. That's just an idea. Again, there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with this franchise, because I genuinely believe that you have fought Nazis, you have fought the Cold War, you have fought the Russians, you've been all over the place doing all this stuff. It is a cool concept. It is very fun. And it is the only one that kind of like homages those classic serials without doing like the, quip every second with the supporting characters that suck. Do the supporting characters in every film work? No. But they are generally more well fleshed out and creative than some of the other supporting characters we see in films trying to emulate this feeling. I really do enjoy the Indiana Jones lore. If you want to reboot it, I'll be there to support you. I think you should try. I think you should do it. We just talked about like the news segment. The Crow is being rebooted. I really like the Brandon Lee stuff, but you should try. Like, you don't know unless you try, and if it doesn't work, it fails into obscurity like RoboCop did. You remember when they rebooted RoboCop with Joel Kinnaman? Who talks about that anymore? Nobody. I'm just saying, don't be afraid to try something. You should take the opportunities to advance the story, advance the stuff, and sure, if you want to give Harrison Ford his Logan-style send-off, where he's saying goodbye to the hat and the whip and the jacket, do it. I support that completely. He loves that character. He idolizes that character. You should do that. But don't let that be the end of this story. You can reboot it. Is it going to be for everyone? No. Will it work? Maybe not. But you don't know unless you take that chance. You have other solutions too. Use the characters in your backlog that you can play with. Have a different story, maybe like a rival archaeologist who's always in the shadow of Indiana Jones because he can't get things right. He or she can't get things right. Play with these things you have in your wheelhouse. Do something original with them. Do something creative with them. Don't be afraid to experiment with this franchise. It is a serial pulp film. Those are always formulaic and the same, but people love them. Only today did that formula break and become something shitty. But Raiders of the Lost Ark, but Temple of Doom, but The Last Crusade and The Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, they're not great films, all of them, but sometimes you see the specialty in there that can make something great. I am 100% on board with either rebooting it or not rebooting it, but as it stands, can you reboot Indiana Jones? Yes. Should you? Maybe not. Will you? I don't think so. There's something to be said, and this is still amazes me. There's something to be said about the films we don't do anything else with. The fact that we haven't really come back to Jaws after Jaws the Revenge, the fact that we haven't come back to Back to the Future, it's impressive to me that we leave those things in the past and we haven't really tried to create more of them. Indiana Jones is kind of like that. The only key difference is Harrison Ford can say whether he wants to or not. Once Harrison Ford stops, who knows what will become of this franchise, but it's looking like it's going to be marketing itself in a different way anyways, because we got things like the video game coming out from Bethesda, which is kind of cool to see. We have the ride at Disney World still, and I'm imagining that's still there. Last I was there, it was still there. You don't need him for this to work. You can try something new. Even if it becomes like Solo, you are expanding the universe and people are still trying to have fun with that. It's okay. It's okay to reboot. It's okay to try something new. And I hope this film, and I cannot wait to talk more. I cannot wait to talk more about Indiana Jones and everything involved in this franchise because it's going to be so fun. So let's end on this note. What would I say if I had to give you like a couple seconds just to talk about each film? Raiders of the Lost Ark is one of the greatest films ever made. It's like the tightest script, the tightest directing, an incredibly fun film that takes itself super seriously while still being super silly with a great cast that wants to be there and wants to have fun. Is it a little dated at times? Some of the effects are, but the story still holds up. It looks fantastic on the big screen. It's working really well. The Temple of Doom is exactly what happens in a sequel that is run by a corporation. You add in younger audience members, so now we have to do kid-friendly things and have a sidekick in there. We get a dumber female lead just because, you know, the audience is for men. Men don't like smart women, even though marrying is the best thing that ever happened to these franchises. That is okay. It makes for a mediocre film with some interesting action beats that doesn't really add anything, but it's still kind of cool. The Last Crusade is a great send-up to this character where you have him playing off of the legendary Sean Connery. Everything about that film was as fun and on par with everything in Raiders. Is it as iconic? Not every scene. There's certain moments that you just hold up and you see them really well. And he meets Hitler. Very interesting, very fun. Kind of weird. Then we jump to the future where we got Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Not a great film that is trying to legacy itself off. It misses the beat completely with lazy CGI, stupid plots, and becoming too science fiction-y when this is an action-adventure film. Do not stray into the realm of the mystic aliens. We can rip out a man's heart, but we cannot have an alien crystal telling us what our life is supposed to be. It becomes stereotypical in that way, and it doesn't do anything to benefit the genre. So, in fairness, this franchise, not always a hit. Sometimes it's a miss. And because of that, it should be open to interpretation. So get your Henry Golding in there. Get Short Round in there. Get a young actress to play Marion. You can reboot it. You can rework it. You can do whatever you want to it. It's not just Harrison Ford. It's an entire identity that's become a franchise. And if it was just like Back to the Future, I'd say don't touch it. But it's not. Clearly there's a market for this. And clearly you should try something with it. So before we go, I do like to end things with a couple of recommendations for you guys. Now we talked about all of the Indiana Jones films. Watch them again. They're all still decent. There isn't one I would say is like less than a 5 out of 10. At its worst, it's a 5 out of 10. I will say that. We did talk about Yellow Jackets a bit with Christina Ricci, so please watch Yellow Jackets and the original Addams Family movies with her as Wednesday. They are fantastic, and she is such a cool person to see. You can watch The Crow. That's a pretty good film that does something cool. And Solo, a Star Wars story. So iconic, so classic, an incredibly fun watch and an incredibly fun time to check out. And those characters are getting more play in the comic books now, so that's really exciting to me. And Atlanta's back, so watch Atlanta. There's nothing to do with it here, but Donald Glover, I mentioned him. Watch Atlanta. So that is going to do it for this episode of the Geek Wave. Now, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. If you are listening to this on the podcast feed, please give us a rating over there. It definitely helps everything out. As always, you can check me out on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter, and I will catch you in the next one. Live on, good spirits, have fun, stay safe, good luck. You know what? We named the dog Indy.